1956, nighttime. Thick fog rolling through Coldwater Canyon in Los Angeles. A car has just left a party at Elizabeth Taylor's house and slammed into a telephone pole. Inside, a man is choking, literally choking, on his own broken teeth, blood everywhere, windshield glass in his face. That man is Montgomery Clift, one of the most famous actors alive, and one of Taylor's closest friends. Everyone else at the party freezes. Elizabeth Taylor does not. She runs down the hill in the dark, climbs into the wreckage of the car, and physically reaches into Clift's mouth to pull the broken teeth out of his throat so he doesn't choke to death on them. No stylist, no assistant, no script, just her hands, someone else's blood, and a decision made in about 2 seconds. That's not the Elizabeth Taylor most people think they know. Most people know the jewelry, the 8 marriages, the violet eyes. What they don't know is that underneath all of it was maybe one of the toughest, strangest, most quietly ferocious women who ever walked through a Hollywood soundstage. So let's actually meet her. Here's the thing nobody tells you about Elizabeth Taylor. Her whole life reads like it was engineered, almost cruelly, to turn a little girl into a legend before she had any say in the matter. And once you start looking at the details, it stops being a glamour story and starts being something closer to a survival story with really, really good lighting. Let's start somewhere strange, with her eyes, because everyone brings up her eyes, but almost nobody mentions this part. Taylor had a genetic mutation that gave her a double row of eyelashes. 2 full sets on every eyelid. It's a real, documented condition called dystochiasis. So that famous, otherworldly stare that launched 1,000 magazine covers? It wasn't makeup. It was quite literally a mutation. Here's the darker mirror image of that fact, though. Taylor was also born with scoliosis, a curved spine, and it worsened dramatically as she aged, eventually leaving her permanently hunched to one side. She spent decades of her career hiding chronic, serious pain behind the poise, the posture, the glamour shots. And when she finally talked about it publicly decades later, she did it with this incredible, almost unsettling dark humor. She once described her body as convex and concave, joked that her x-rays were hysterical, and said doctors basically threw up their hands and told her there was nothing to be done, and that this apparently was supposed to be cheerful news. Sit with that. A woman spent 60 years being photographed as the most beautiful woman in the world while quietly living in a body that was slowly folding in on itself. And her response to that horror was a joke. Now here's a piece that almost never makes it into the highlight reels, and it should, because it explains a lot. Taylor began acting at 9 years old, and being pushed into the spotlight so young seemed to trigger real anger in her father. Decades later, in an interview with Barbara Walters, she said it plainly, that when she was a little girl, her father would drink, and he'd hit her. She said she eventually made peace with it once she was grown, once she had children of her own. But think about the timeline for a second. This is a child who is simultaneously becoming one of the most photographed faces on the planet, and going home to a house where that same fame was, by her own account, part of what set off the violence. Nobody was protecting her from that. She was 9 years old, carrying 2 entirely different lives at once, and there wasn't a single adult whose job it was to just let her be a kid. Everyone jokes about the 8 marriages. Here's what almost nobody sits with: how young this all started, and how strange the pattern actually was. Her 3rd husband, the film producer Mike Todd, died in a plane crash. She wrote later that she had loved him completely, that her whole sense of self had soared under how he treated her. Then he was just gone in a crash, and she was a widow in her 20s with a small daughter. What happened next is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable in the way real life often is. Taylor married Eddie Fisher, who had been Todd's best friend and the best man at their wedding. The problem: Fisher was already married to actress Debbie Reynolds, who happened to be Taylor's close friend, and who had stood as her matron of honor at that same wedding. Fisher left Reynolds for Taylor. The tabloids had an absolute field day, and for a while the entire country treated Elizabeth Taylor like a home-wrecking villain in a script she never asked to be cast in. And here's the almost eerie footnote. Years later, Taylor and Reynolds actually rebuilt their friendship. 2 women, dragged through one of the ugliest tabloid scandals of the era, quietly decided the story the press told about them wasn't the real one, and fixed it themselves off camera, with no reporters invited. Then there's husband number 5 and 6, the same man twice. Richard Burton, They married in 1964, divorced in 1974, remarried in 1975, and divorced again in 1976. She said later that they probably would have gone for a third round if he hadn't died in 1984. Two people who apparently could not stay together and could not stay apart, running the same experiment twice and getting the same result both times. And then, decades later, husband number 8. A construction worker named Larry Fortensky, who she met, of all places, in rehab at the Betty Ford Clinic. He once said you could always tell when Elizabeth Taylor was coming down the stairs because you'd hear her jewelry rattling before you ever saw her, and that he was always the one left waiting. One of the most famous women alive, married to a man who fixed things for a living, and the marriage still ended the same way most of them did. Worn down, this time by a press that simply would not leave the two of them alone. Here's a fact that deserves way more attention than it gets. Elizabeth Taylor was the first actress in history to be paid $1 million for a single film, Cleopatra, 1963. When someone raised an eyebrow at the number, she reportedly just shrugged and said something like, if someone was foolish enough to offer her $1 million, she certainly wasn't foolish enough to turn it down. That line usually gets played as a punchline. It's actually a pretty precise summary of how she operated her entire career. At a time when film studios controlled every part of an actress's life, her contracts, her image, her marriages, sometimes even her diet, Elizabeth Taylor was one of the very first women in Hollywood to understand her own value as leverage, and to just take it, bluntly, without apologizing for it. Here's where the story turns into something almost nobody saw coming from the scandalous 8-times married movie star. In 1959, she converted to Judaism and later became a prominent supporter of Jewish causes. And then in the 1980s, when a mysterious disease was killing gay men across the country and most of America, including most of the government, was actively pretending it wasn't happening, Elizabeth Taylor did something almost nobody with her level of fame was willing to do. She co-founded the American Foundation for AIDS Research and helped raise millions of dollars for the cause, at a time when simply saying the word AIDS out loud in public could tank a career. Think about the gap between those two images. The tabloid headline version of her jewels, scandal, 8 husbands, and the actual woman who spent her final decades in Senate hearing rooms and hospital wards, using the exact same fame the tabloids used to mock her with, to fight for people the rest of the country had decided weren't worth fighting for. She died in 2011 at 79 of congestive heart failure. The same fragile heart that had decades earlier apparently made room for an entire generation of people nobody else wanted to stand next to. So, the eyelashes were a mutation. The posture was a spine slowly folding under 60 years of pain, hidden behind perfect lighting. The scandal was a widow trying to survive being 26 and famous and alone. And underneath the tabloid punchline of 8 marriages was a woman who, when it actually mattered, ran downhill in the dark to save a friend's life with her bare hands, and then spent the back half of her life doing the exact same thing for total strangers, on a much bigger stage. Elizabeth Taylor spent her whole career being looked at. Maybe the most interesting thing about her is how rarely anyone actually looked closely enough to see any of this.